Inside the Birds is back. What's going on, everybody? It's Geoff Mosher and Adam Caplan, and this is a very special edition of Inside the Birds, which is presented by Ocean Casino Resort in Atlantic City. They are the exclusive Jersey Shore resort of Inside the Birds. It's a special edition because we got Greg Cosell back with us as promised. Greg Cosell with us, and what we're going to do with Greg in a very quick hitting format, but also educational and informative, is we're going to take a look at the Eagles schedule in 2023, which, Greg, I'm sure you would agree, looks a lot different than 2022 and probably more challenging theoretically than last year. And we'll get into that. We're going to have your thoughts on some of the teams, some, different personnel scheme, things to watch for with each game week to week. And we're going to do that not only this episode, but break it up and talk about the second half of the schedule in the next episode as well. So we're happy to have you with us for these next two episodes. What was your first thought, Greg, when, you knew the opponents, right? But then when you see sort of how it comes out and the cluster that you play in, what was your initial thought?
Geoff, it's funny. I'm a bad guy to ask about that because I don't really look at the schedule in much detail, with this time of year. So, I didn't really have any, brilliant thought whatsoever. I just thought it was interesting that they open with 3 consecutive games that are non-division games. In the minds of many, maybe they don't seem quite as important. But as you guys probably know, once the schedule comes out, teams become very focused on week 1 and also the first quarter of the season. That really becomes their foundation because no team wants to get off to a bad start. I know that's just not a profound statement, but that's the way teams think. They think now, okay, Eagles are thinking, we got to beat the Patriots. It's as simple as that. Plus, we're going on the road. We got to win that game. Right. And then they think in terms of the first quarter of the season. They don't play a division opponent until week 4 with the Commanders. But they've got 2 away games, and you can say what you want about Tampa. A lot of people don't think they're going to be any good. We'll get to them when we start talking more specifically, but, it's still a road game.
Right.
And that's, those are not necessarily easy in the NFL.
Yeah, what obviously jumped out with me and Adam is you come out of the bye, Kansas City, Buffalo, San Francisco, Dallas, Seattle, New York. That's a pretty, again, you never know how these teams are going to be, but if you go on organizational history and how they've been, that's a pretty interesting stretch for them.
They've got a schedule that, as we speak now, in mid to late May, looks fairly imposing. But again, until we sort of start seeing how things play out, you don't know. But your point's absolutely correct, Geoff. You look right now, and that stretch after the bye is not going to be easy.
All right, well, let's take a dive. We'll start off with the first half of the schedule here. And as you mentioned, they are going to open their season on the road against the Patriots. And Adam, this is not the Patriots that the team saw last year from a coaching staff, philosophically, and things like that. Go through some of the changes here.
Yeah, first of all, it's really interesting. So, yeah, Bill O'Brien is back, who people can say what they want about Bill O'Brien, but in the coaching industry, in terms of play caller, he's recognized as being solid. Oh, yeah. So they get him back. He knows the system. He knows exactly what he's doing. Matt Patricia, ironically, who is more or less their play callers now with the Eagles. That's kind of it is so bizarre because he was the D coordinator when the Eagles beat them. But it is what it is. And it's good to get Bill O'Brien in there because he'll know how to coach Mac Jones. Mac Jones needs the coaching. He's going to get that. And that, to me, is the big deal here. And then also Juju Smith-Schuster, when we look at personnel, Booty, the receiver, Demario Douglas, receiver, and Mike Gesicki stays in conference, stays in division. And then they added in the draft of significance Keon White and Christian Gonzalez, who dropped. We'll talk to Greg about him. Mm-hmm. And those will be the additions.
Greg, offensively, what are you expecting to look differently about the Patriots because of Bill O'Brien's return?
One of the things Bill O'Brien has always been a big believer in, and I think you'll see a lot of it because one thing we do know about Mac Jones is that he is a smart player. Bill O'Brien has always been a big believer in empty formations. And again, you don't line up an empty, 80% of your snaps, but I think that's something you will see. And I think that allows the quarterback to see what the defense is doing pre-snap. Mac Jones needs to be a high-level pre-snap quarterback. He needs to really research and understand what the defensive look is before the snap of the ball, and then he can execute. He's an executor and a ball distributor. So what you have to do is you have to give him every tool in the toolbook toolbox so that he can do that prior to the snap of the ball. There's one player I'd love to mention on offense, and I knew he wouldn't be drafted high, but he's kind of an intriguing player to me, and that's Kayshon Boutte. People may remember his freshman year, he had a 300-yard game late in the season, and everybody talked about him as being the next guy. Comparing him to previous LSU receivers, he looked like that guy. It didn't quite work out in his remaining 2 years at LSU. He had some personal issues that I'm sure you guys are familiar with, but he kind of reminded me, if you were to reach his ceiling, okay, and that's the way I often think this. I think, okay, this guy has certain traits. If he can play to those traits all the time, I thought there's a Stephon Diggs comparison to be made. Now, people are going to go, oh my God, you're nuts. Keep in mind, Diggs came out of Maryland as a 5th-round pick and the 146th player chosen in the draft. That's what I was comparing him to, not Stephon Diggs in the last number of years as arguably a top 5 receiver in the NFL. No one thought that of Diggs when he was a 5th-round pick and the 146th player chosen. So Boutte, to me, is a fascinating player. He's a total unknown. And by the way, he could flame out and not make the team. We know that's the case with later round picks. But there is talent there. And to me, he's a really intriguing player, as is their entire receiving core. No one thinks about the Patriots receiving core, guys, because it hasn't been really that good in recent years. But, Smith-Schuster's a professional receiver. I'm still fascinated to see Tyquan Thornton if he can stay healthy. And now Boutte, very interesting. Obviously, they still have Parker, who, has had moments in this league where he looked like a big-time number 1 type receiver. So to me, it's kind of intriguing. And Gesicki, everybody knows what Gesicki is. He's a straight line, vertical guy. He's a movement receiver, crossers, overs, seams. He's not a sit down. He's not sink your hips, get in and out of breaks receiver. And they'll go from there. But I think the offense will look clearly different.
How would you, if you're Belichick and O'Brien, how would you, with this group you just talked about, how would you attack the Eagles in week 1? We know it's week 1, and what you see in week 1 is not what you see later on. But if you were New England, how would you game plan to try to beat the Eagles defense?
Boy, I mean, again, the Eagles defense right now, as we look at it, is going to be pretty good up front. They're going to be a hard defense to run against. I mean, I've spoken to some people at the Birds. I don't know if you guys have recently. They feel like Jordan Davis has made major progress in the short part of this offseason, and they feel like he'll really be a strong run defender. Obviously they drafted Jalen Carter. I think there'll be a tough defense to run against. I think I think that Belichick will want to do that, but I don't know if that's really a viable way to attack this defense, particularly in normal down and distance situations.
On defense, Greg, we know that Bill Belichick loves cornerbacks, loves safeties, loves that secondary, and he got Christian Gonzalez, who you felt had the best tape of any corner coming out of the draft, and they got him at a pretty good value, I suppose, middle of the round. Now everything might match up to you, because when we did our shows, the Intel with Greg Cosell, Adam and I were saying that the feedback we were getting on teams that interviewed him or talked to him just didn't match with maybe a top 5, top 10 billing he was getting, and he didn't go top 5 or top 10, was not the first, second, or third corner taken. But from a value and this team, how they use their corners, the Patriots do you see a good marriage there?
Yeah, and Adam can speak to this more, but I think that a lot of that had to do with his personality more than the tape. There was a report, true or not, that the Steelers loved the tape, but then they interviewed the kid and didn't want to draft him. So again, you never know those things. The tape's really good, and it made sense for them because otherwise, going into the draft, they're starting outside corners. No one was over 5'10". Really hard to play in the NFL with corners that are 5'10" and under. I love Marcus Jones, but he's 5'8". Gonzalez is over 6 feet. He's over 6'1". My guess is, barring anything unforeseen, he'll be a day 1 starter. They just needed some size. They needed guys who could line up. I mean, they're playing the Eagles week 1. It's kind of hard to play against the Eagles on the outside versus Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown with 5'9", 5'10" corners. And granted, Gonzalez is a rookie, and maybe he'll be taken to school, but he certainly has high-level traits.
All right, let's move on, I should say, to week 2. For the second straight year, The Vikings at the Link in prime time. This one Thursday night. That's a weird scheduling quirk. Let's
Yeah.
start with defense this time because they have a new defensive coordinator in Brian Flores. And Adam, just quickly, Brian Flores landing in Minnesota. Was that something you expected, or did you think he might be elsewhere this offseason?
Well, I thought he'd get another D coordinator job, and he'll bring in his version of Belichick's defense, and so that'll be interesting. We'll talk to Greg about that. But so here's who they added in free agency in the draft: Jordan Addison, receiver. He'll start on the outside. Jaquelin Roy, who Greg told us about in our lead up to the draft, a D tackle out of LSU. Marcus Davenport comes over from New Orleans. Dean Lowry stays in the division, formerly of Green Bay, who's a D lineman. And at corner, Byron Murphy, and they were so bad at corner last year, and Blackman, who's another corner, Greg. So when you look at this group, okay, Greg, we know defensively they struggle. Let's call it like it is, particularly in the secondary. But so they had Murphy and his kid Blackman. Eagles, we know they'll probably be more 11 than 12, but they could do both. If you're the Eagles and you're going to go against this defense, Greg, would you not spread them out?
Yeah, I would spread them out, and what you're going to get from Brian Flores then is pressure. You know, he's this defense will look totally different than the Ed Donatel defense from a year ago. Donatel didn't blitz much. It was a lot of soft is not the right word because I'm sure they didn't view it as soft, but they played predominantly coverage. Ed Donatel's more from the Vic Fangio school, whereas Flores, even though he has a Belichick background, he tends to be an aggressive coach. You're going to see more pressure concepts. Byron Murphy will be their slot corner. You guys may not be familiar with Mekhi Blackman. He came out of USC. I really liked his tape. He's a really good prospect, in my opinion. Again, I'm not going to sit here and tell you he's going to be a starting outside corner. Much remains there. They're very hopeful. I'm sure they're very hopeful that 2 draft picks from not this draft, but the previous draft in Andrew Booth and Evans, that they can, probably be their starters and give them quality play on the corner. So those are question marks until they play, but I'm sure that's what they're hoping. Both have good size. And they sort of restructured their D line a bit. Roy was a 5th round pick because of other things than his play on the field, because his tape was very good. So we'll see. But the point is, this defense will look totally different and be far more aggressive.
Yeah, I can tell you just from talking to some Viking sources that they're excited about the potential of Roy and Blackman. They thought that those were good values for them where they got them.
Well, I watched a lot of Blackman, and I really liked his tape a lot.
Right. So offensively, they say goodbye to Adam Thielen, who had been a very good wide receiver for them for a while. They add Jordan Addison. Of course, Justin Jefferson is still there. And, we'll see what happens with the Jalen Reagor trade. I guess he'll get some opportunities here along with KJ Osborne. So they seem to have and then they added the tight end last year at the trade deadline, Hawkinson. Yeah. Does this look like a pretty good offensive team? Because they were supposed to be last year and they were up and down at times.
Yeah, but I think they've got a lot of talent on offense. That's the thing. I mean, this is a team that, we know what Jefferson is. They're obviously counting on Addison to step right in and be a starter. He's still a rookie, but that's what they're counting on. I like KJ Osborne as a number 3 quite a bit, and I think he showed that a year ago. They still have Cook. They still have Madison. Hawkinson is a big-time tight end. I mean, this is a good offense. Obviously they struggled. Kirk Cousins last year on the Monday night game, Kirk Cousins has 2 or 3 games a year where he's bad. And that's been his MO his entire career. And that was one of those games. But for the most part, Kirk Cousins is a pretty efficient player who puts up very good numbers.
We should also mention, obviously, because the reports are out there, and Adam and I know that
Dalvin Cook?
Dalvin Cook. It's if he's back, I'd be surprised. I don't know. Would you be surprised at this point, Adam, if Dalvin Cook was back? Yeah, me too.
Ominous. Yeah,
right. I'm with you on that. So Alexander Mattison would take over the bulk of the carries. How do you look at their running game without Dalvin Cook?
Well, Ty Chandler is a player I really like coming out of college. He could end up being the number 2 back, or they have Dwayne McBride, who lasted late until the 7th round. But he's a guy that's pretty solid, and he's actually a very good runner. He has no receiving ability and was not used as such in college. But my guess is they would probably feel comfortable with a Madison, Chandler, McBride trio. And I think your point's a good one, that Dalvin Cook could well not be there.
All right, we will move on to week 3 in a second. First, it's Ocean Casino Resort's 5th birthday this summer. They can't wait to celebrate with you. Join Ocean for exciting promotions and sweepstakes, headline entertainment, the best day life and nightlife lineup in AC, the debut of the birthday bar, exclusive local collabs and partnerships, commemorative 5th birthday merchandise, and so much more. Don't miss stunning fireworks and unique events all summer long. Ocean Rewards members will enjoy over $5 million in gifts and prizes, so be sure to sign up for an Ocean Rewards card to get in on the fun next time you visit. All right, week 3, Greg. This one is the most perplexing thing to me, to Adam and I, and a lot of other people. Obviously, they're supposed to play Tampa Bay this year. That's not the perplexing part. The fact that with all the changes that the Bucs have gone through, including losing Tom Brady, that the NFL thought this would be a good primetime matchup is a little bit surprising to me. However, it's a primetime matchup. So, Adam, I'll ask you, without Brady, where is it looking like at quarterback right now? And just overall, what's changed about the Buccaneers from a play calling standpoint?
Yeah, so look, Dave Canales is the OC. He takes over, first-time play caller, formerly of Seattle, as their quarterbacks coach. I know Seattle spoke very highly of him. See how he does as a play caller. But the big thing is that quarterback, as you said, Brady's gone. It's Baker Mayfield versus Kyle Trask in training camp. So that job is wide open. And on your point, it's like the league knew this. It's also a Monday night game. I'm surprised that they gave the Bucs this game. We know the Eagles being on Monday night is no surprise because they're one of the elite teams. But
right.
So as you go through the personnel moves, so Chase Edmonds will be a backup most likely for them at running back. But they're probably going to have 2 new starting guards. Cody Mock, who's a second rounder. We saw at the Senior Bowl with the crazy hair. Matt Filer, who could play right tackle or guard, probably going to play guard. But the big one was Kalijah Cansey, who Greg told us about. I know Greg loved him. We'll talk about him. At D tackle, Diaby is a pass rusher. Ryan Neal, a former Eagle, by the way, who's safety. And those were the moves that they had this offseason.
I mean, Greg, I feel like defensively, they're still, with Todd Bowles in charge, and they've got some good defensive players. They'll probably be formidable, but offensively, how would you handicap this quarterback situation here?
I mean, if I had to pick someone today, I'd say that Baker Mayfield will be their starting quarterback. I just don't know if Kyle Trask really fits the NFL. He's a pure pocket quarterback. He's big. He's stiff in the pocket. He's got a good arm, but not the kind of arm to really compensate for the fact that he doesn't have any movement ability. So I would expect Baker Mayfield to win that job.
Do their wide receivers, when you watched them last year, Mike Evans and who am I forgetting?
They have Godwin and Gage.
Godwin, can they separate still, or do they still, to you, are they top level receivers, or has age or injuries taken a little toll there?
I think Godwin's really, really good in the slot. He missed some time last year. I think Evans is a really good receiver. He still is, in my opinion. Last year, their offense, even with Tom Brady, was just it seemed to be a struggle every game. They didn't protect very well at all. Brady, he was very conscious of the rush. Let's put it that way. So again, the O-line becomes critical here, no matter who the quarterback is, because even though Mayfield has lighter feet than Trask, you wouldn't call Mayfield truly a second reaction quarterback. And then the running game is still a question mark as well. I mean, I like Rachaad White a lot, but we don't know exactly what he is. If he has to be the guy that they want to give 220 or 230 carries to, we don't know that.
Right. All right, that'll be an interesting one. Still surprised it's prime time. Let us move to a week 4 game and also week 8. It's Washington. And now's a good time to let people know that later this summer, we're going to bring Greg back and really go through the meat and potatoes of the NFC East, all 4 teams. That'll be a series later this summer. But we are going to obviously address the schedule. Washington, week 4, week 8. Adam, the big thing here is yet another new quarterback. Sam Howell right now looking like the guy who's going to be the guy. Which
should be, yeah. I mean, they're saying the job's open, but I wouldn't call it open. The way they're talking, it's going to be Sam Howell. So here are the changes. Andrew Wiley should be the right tackle, comes over from the Chiefs. The Eagles know him very, very well. And Ron Rivera always does this. They're going to have some changes on defense. And boy, they really address it. Cody Barton comes over from Seattle.
Yep.
The big ones are in the secondary. Emmanuel Forbes, one of the first round pick, who Greg told us about. We spoke about him before the draft. And Jatavius Martin, a really good player. It's a safety who could play corner as well. Was a rookie. He's a second rounder out of Illinois. And then, of course, Eric Bieniemy is a big one, guys. He was going to be the play caller. and he won't have Andy Reid in his ear. He's actually going to call the plays on his own.
Yeah, some significant changes here, Greg, both in offensive play calling and I don't know. I feel like Washington adds to its defense every single year. The names look good on paper. I always expect them to be really formidable, but they just don't seem to be able to put it together. But with Martin added to Cam Curl, it seems like their secondary has an opportunity to be pretty good with that front line that they got if Jack Del Rio can figure this thing out.
Yeah, I mean Forbes, he will start at one corner position. I spoke to an offensive coordinator in the SEC who said that Forbes was really, really a good player and someone they were conscious of literally on every play. He has the ability to play both off coverage, which he played a ton of in college, and he can also press. I really like Martin, the Illinois kid. He played safety, he played outside corner, and he played slot corner at Illinois. And I thought he was a really, really good prospect. Obviously, the Commanders did as well because they drafted him in the second round. And I would expect him to start and be their slot corner. Offensively, I don't think there's going to be a lot of mystery. I know they have good receivers, but I think with Sam Howell, who will be their starting quarterback, barring anything unforeseen, when you look at their running backs, this is going to be a grinded out offense. That's the way they want to play, and let Howell work off that. Brian Robinson, Antonio Gibson, even the running back they drafted in the 6th round from Kentucky, Chris Rodriguez, another grinder. That's how they want to play. Hopefully, in their mind, the run game sets up big play opportunities in the pass game, but that's what this team is going to be, certainly early in the season, certainly week 4 when the Eagles play them for the first time.
And one thing, guys, I think where the Eagles have that advantage, I know they added a couple offensive linemen in the draft, but the Eagles' defensive line versus Washington's offensive line, that to me is going to be the story of the game because Washington has got a bottom 10 offensive line. Eagles, as Greg mentioned earlier, they're still going to have a very good defensive line. I probably don't agree with that. That to me is the only chance Washington has. If they can protect, this could be close. But the Eagles just have too much talent. But I'll tell you what, though, before we get out of these opponents here, Washington's got a lot of talent on defense. My gosh, if these kids on the defensive line could get it together, we don't know about Chase Young if he could ever be the same. They're super deep, and we mentioned Forbes and Martin. They can match up, guys. Their defense can match up to the Eagles to a certain extent on offense.
Feels like we've had this same conversation year after year. If the offensive line versus the Eagles defensive line always seems to get them in the end, even though they did win one game last year. All right, well, if you're the Eagles, you got to be happy about 2 straight weeks of what looks like Baker Mayfield and then Sam Howell. Week 5, if he's healthy, it's the Rams. There's Matthew Stafford. Adam, they had a couple of additions to the offensive line, including a rookie who I thought he was a pretty good pick for them, Steve Avila from TCU.
And they got Byron Young, one of the 2 Byron Young for this draft. But Matthew Stafford's back, but man, their offensive line doesn't have a lot of talent.
Yeah,
they traded away Jalen Ramsey. They had caps challenges, so they got sort of a skeleton team on defense. Let's be honest.
Yeah,
they just don't have a lot of talent. This is a team, guys. Greg, we'll go to you here. If you look at it, Stafford is back. But is there anyone who worries you? Now, Cooper Kupp's back from his injury, but this is a team I would think, Greg, the Eagles should not struggle against.
Well, defensively, they don't look like they're very good at all right now. Again, let's see how it all plays out. But if you just look at their depth chart as we speak today, on the defensive side of the ball, you're not thinking a whole lot about this team whatsoever. So, that's kind of where they stand right now. Obviously, it's the same coaching staff. Raheem Morris is still there. It's an entirely new group of people. So, Raheem Morris kept a lot of the principles of Brandon Staley because Sean McVay did not want any kind of dramatic tactical changes. But now you have all new people. So you don't know. I mean, I look at the corner position right now, and is it going to be Kendrick and Rochelle starting on the outside if we were to line up and play today? I don't know. It looks like it. So we'll see. Defensively, this team is a total question mark with a lot of players who are just, besides Aaron Donald, you just don't know.
Yeah, and then offensively, Allen Robinson is now, I believe, with the Steelers. So you're looking at their wide receiver crew as kind of Van Jefferson, and of course Cooper Kupp coming back off a major injury, though. it's not a skeleton crew, but I think there are some question marks there. And of course, Matt Stafford with his concussions and other injuries. Yeah, very interesting game. And that's a sort of a team that maybe could be better than you think, or maybe could be pretty bad again. It all depends on health and development.
Stafford, again, he's later in his career. He's fought injuries. I can tell you for a fact, and you guys probably know this, their coaching staff loved Stetson Bennett. I mean, they see Stetson Bennett as a starting quarterback in the NFL. I can tell you that for a fact.
Wow. That's
why they took him in the fourth, which is a lot earlier than most people thought. Yeah, it's good stuff.
Really good stuff. All right, speaking of an aging quarterback, we got one that we're going to get into in a second. First, we're going to take a break real quick to hear from some great sponsors. All right, week 6, New York Jets. It's going to be played at MetLife Stadium. The Eagles will see Aaron Rodgers in a Jets uniform. And not only is Aaron Rodgers, but a lot of other newcomers, Adam, to this Jets team.
Yeah, so Aaron Rodgers gets this guy named Hackett. They're going to run the old school Green Bay offense, or old school West Coast. And then you've got Rodgers, as you said, and he gets his buddies, Alan Lazard and Randall Cobb, Mecole Hardman, who should have been a Jet 4 years ago when former GM tried to get him in that 2019 draft, but becomes a Jet 4 years later. Joe Tippmann, who some people believe is the best center for this draft, and Chuck Clark in a trade, really good value trade for Joe Douglas, gets him from the Ravens at safety.
Greg, I know the Jets have been down this block before, and everybody makes the Brett Favre comparison, but I'll get your tape evaluation on Aaron Rodgers in a second. But some of these moves to me are good moves that definitely make this team formidable. I'd be cautious about saying that this is a duplicate of what happened years ago with Aaron Rodgers. I mean, with Brett Favre. What do you think about this overall? Yeah.
I personally agree with what Adam said about those who thought Tippmann was the best center prospect. I thought he was. I'm sure they see him as a day one starter. I'm sure he can do that. Offensively, they've got a lot of weapons, guys. And say what you want about Rodgers. I mean, was he great last year? No. Does he move as well as he once did? I'd say the answer to that is no. We have no idea what his broken finger, the effect that had. I would bet Rodgers will play well this year. And he look, I've said this before. We may have never seen a better thrower in the history of the NFL than Aaron Rodgers as a pure thrower of the football. And they've got weapons, and they've got Breece Hall, and he's back. So, and they still have Carter, and they drafted the Pitt running back, Abinaconda. And, defensively, there's a lot of talent on this defense. This is a good group. Jets have a lot of talent top to bottom on their roster.
And Garrett Wilson, by the way, to flip it back to offense, is a first-round pick. Aaron Rodgers actually gets to play with a wide receiver who was drafted in the first round. That could be a really special connection this year.
Could well be, and Wilson had a really good rookie season. People might forget Devontae Adams was not a first-round pick. He was a second-round pick when he came out of college.
That's right. Taken behind Jordan Matthews, by the way, so I can make Eagles fans feel upset about that.
Yeah, in that matchup in Week 6, to me, it's like if I'm the Eagles, I'm trying to figure out how am I going to beat them. Like, what's the Greg? What would you say that, because we know how good their defense is, and they went from having one of the worst cornerback tandems to one of the best in DJ Reed and Sauce Gardner.
Yeah,
they're good at safety.
And just so people understand, Gardner was not a matchup corner last year. Yeah. He almost exclusively played on the left, and Reed almost exclusively played on the right.
Interesting.
As soon as the schedule came out, all I saw on social media was, here are the matchups for Sauce Gardner for this season. Now, they could change. There's no question. It's another year. They could make a change. But last year, Sauce Gardner was not a matchup corner. He played on the left side. There's a hard defense to play against. I mean, I think the Eagles, look, we're way too early, and no one knows what tweaks the Eagles are going to make based on an opponent that they're going to play. What are we in Week 6 now?
Yes.
We don't know the answer to that. We have to see what happens early in the season. But I think the Eagles have a clearly defined offensive approach that starts with I don't want to say starts with the run game in terms of how many times they hand it off, but it starts with the run game in the idea that Hurts dictates how defenses have to play, and that causes problems for defenses.
Definitely. All right, a couple more teams to wrap up this first half. First, we want to tell everybody to check out our friends at phlsportsnation.com. They're enhancing the fans' experience with their coverage of all Philadelphia sports teams. For the fan, by the fan is their motto. So make sure you check them out at phlsportsnation.com. And on Twitter, it's at phlsportsnation. We'll also hear from our good friends at Sky Motor Cars.
Sky Motor Cars in Westchester is a different sort of dealership. All it takes is one look at their Highline pre-owned vehicles that people all over the country want and need. Owner Brett Schiller, make sure you don't spend a dime of your money before you purchase the car. Sky Motor Cars allows you to make all the decisions regarding your next vehicle. At Sky Motor Cars, you never have to spend more than necessary. Visit SkyMotorCars.com today or call 610-918-7225.
All right, if you happen to go into Sky Motor Cars, check them out in Westchester, PA. Tell them Adam and Geoff sent you. You will get a great deal. All right, guys, week 7, Miami. And Miami seems to always be making changes, Adam. New defensive coordinator who's got a familiar name and a couple of new players.
Yeah, Vic Fangio is the defensive coordinator, so it's the Fangio system versus the Fangio system. Pretty cool. Additions on offense, Devin Achane at running back, who we'll talk about in a second, and David Long, formerly of, I believe, Tennessee.
Yeah.
And the Rams, who have like a million corners, they bring in Jalen Ramsey via trade, and then they draft Cam Smith. They could match up against the Eagles because they're super deep at corner. They got obviously Howard. We just mentioned Ramsey, Kohu, Cam Smith, Igbahani, who's been a bust, a former first round corner, Nick Needham, Javon Holland, and Jones at safety. They've got a good front. Greg, this defense is something else.
Did you mention Xavier Howard, by the way?
Howard.
That's
Chubb.
Yeah. What do you think, Greg? That's a pretty good.
It's a very good defense, very good defense, and it gives Vic Fangio a lot of different things to do. Everybody has this sense that Fangio just plays, split safety. He starts with that look a lot, but goes to a lot of different things. It's not a static defense by any means. And when you have two corners that can line up and play press man coverage, it really enhances your options with the rest of your defense and the tactics that are now available to you. Jalen Phillips started to come on last year. He's going to be a very good edge player. David Long is kind of an overlooked free agent here because he was a very good player the last year and a half in Tennessee. And he gives them, they wanted more speed at that position because last year they played a Landon Roberts next to Jerome Baker. And now with Long and Baker, those are two guys that can move. They fit today's NFL.
Well, obviously the big question for them, Greg, is offensively. Can they protect Tua? Can Tua stay healthy? Because when he's been healthy, they've been a pretty good dominant offense. They have two great wide receivers. What do you think of the O-line now and the running game in particular with the addition of Devin Achane? And I would add, I'd watch for Miami as they probably would like to even look to add to the running backs, and maybe the guy we talked about, Dalvin Cook, would be a good fit there.
Yeah, Achane is a pretty explosive guy. I mean, he's probably not a foundation type back. He's 5'8", 188, but he is really explosive, and he's a very good receiver. They were more of a passing team a year ago than a running team. They were very rhythmic. That's what Tua's game is. They use motion as much or more than any team in the NFL. It's very hard to press Waddle and Hill, but you need to when they're static because their pass game is so rhythm-based. If you give Waddle and Hill free access off the ball, then they just catch the ball on the move. And that's really difficult because they're both incredibly explosive.
One area where the Eagles will have an advantage is their defensive line versus the Miami offensive line.
100%.
I'm very surprised that Miami did not really sort of reshape this offensive line. It's just that they've spent a lot of money on Armstead and they spent a lot of draft capital. It hasn't been what they thought. But one other thing, we mentioned Waddle and Hill and how fast they are, the fastest tandem in the National Football League. Oh, they just added Robbie Chosen Anderson, who could flat out run. So, man, I cannot wait to see this matchup in Week 7.
It's going to be a great one. All right, we got one more matchup left in the first half, and that, of course, because Week 8 we already did Washington. Week 9 and also Week 14 is the Dallas Cowboys. They play them Week 9, and then they got the bye week. Adam, this is not the same Cowboys. They have a new play caller, although they didn't have to search far and wide to find him.
Yeah, exactly right. Mike McCarthy, who pushed Kellen Moore out because he wanted to call the plays. He's going to run his West Coast offense. Moore didn't really run one. So this is what he wanted. And, boy, they were aggressive with the Brandon Cooks trade. They finally got someone because of Michael Gallup's knee injury. They know they had to do something. They added Schoonmaker, the tight end out of Michigan at second round, which is a little bit earlier than most people thought. But, hey, he's there. He'll join his teammate Mozzie Smith, who Greg loved. I know.
I did.
We'll talk about him in a second. Stephon Gilmore. We'll talk about him as well, Greg. So, talking about Stephon Gilmore, let's start with him. When the Eagles have to go up against him, does he move as well as he used to?
I don't think he's exactly the same, but he can play press. And Dan Quinn, these last couple of years, has played as much cover one, which is man-to-man with a single high safety, as any team in the league. And now he's going to feel comfortable doing that with Diggs and Gilmore. So, and by the way, they got really good play last year from Deron Bland, an unknown player who's a 5th-round pick a year ago. He played extremely well for them. It would not surprise me if he ends up being their slot corner. And then, of course, they're essentially making Micah Parsons a defensive end, whatever you want to call him in the lexicon. He's going to be almost exclusively an on-the-ball player. And I think that's the right move. And Mozzie Smith, I really liked his tape a lot. I'm sure they see him as a starter at defensive tackle. And I think one reason they're going to make Parsons an on-the-ball player, that's obviously a more premium position in this league than a stacked backer. But Damone Clark played well last year. He was the kid who had the injury. He couldn't play his first year in the league, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
He came out of LSU, and he would have been higher than a 5th-round pick if there was no injury, which I think showed up at the combine when he came out. Adam, you'll remember that, I think. But he played well for them down the stretch, and I think they feel very comfortable with him as a stack backer.
Yeah, I mean, this looks like a good defense. Dallas has had a good defense for a while. They added to it. And then offensively, Greg, we know that Dak Prescott struggled last year. I believe he led the NFL in interceptions, which is not something he was known for doing. We talked about the impact or lack of impact of an explosive receiver in their crew, and they go and add Brandon Cooks, who has been very consistent in this league for the last 7 or 8 years. I mean, he's 1,000 yards almost every year.
I got a question whether, Geoff, maybe Adam knows. What is the issue with Brandon Cooks, Adam? Because tape-wise, he's pretty good, but yet it seems that nobody wants to keep him.
5 teams now. 5 teams before the age of 30. Yeah. Well, with Houston, they were in a rebuild, and he didn't want to be there because when you're a guy like Brandon Cooks, I mean, he was making a ton of money, and it just made no sense to keep him. Now, we know there were issues between Sean Payton many years ago and Cooks. It's been well documented. They tried to downplay it, but it was a factor. He moves on to New England. New England got him. In fact, he got hurt against the Eagles right in the Super Bowl, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then he keeps moving on. It's bizarre, but they wanted him. Dallas really wanted him. Guy's a player. And when you look at the Eagles matchup, this is what we haven't talked about a lot with the Eagles defense. The one issue is when you spread them out. Okay, you got Maddox. You got two older corners. If one of them gets hurt, that to me is an issue because Greedy Williams, you don't know what you're getting. He's had an injury history. To me, if you're going against the Eagles, you got to spread them out. I think that's probably your best chance.
Yeah. And maybe Gallup comes back to being more Gallup another year removed from his injury, because he certainly wasn't a year ago. But when he was, prior to the injury, he was your classic boundary X. He had vertical ability. And you mentioned Schoonmaker. Again, I'm not one who talks to people and asks where I think guys should be drafted, but I like Schoonmaker. First of all, he's a terrific blocker, which you had to be at Michigan because they ran the ball. But he has athletic traits as a receiver. It's just he wasn't used that way very often. He did catch 35 balls at Michigan this year, which is a lot for one of their tight ends in that offense. I think he's actually a really intriguing player. I'm not suggesting we're going to be talking about him like he's Travis Kelce, but I think he's a much better receiver than people might think.
All right, that wraps up for the first half of the Eagles schedule. The next half we'll do in the podcast that drops Monday morning. Thanks to Greg Cosell for joining us. Of course, I'm Geoff Mosher with Adam Caplan. You've been listening to Inside the Birds, and as always, we thank you for flying with us inside the birds.